Today's episode is for the grown kids who have been affected by substance abuse, whether it be yourself or someone you know, the ones that feel the pressure to use drugs even if they don't want to, and the ones that are constantly telling their friends to please test your drugs.
So in this episode, we're going to be talking about not only the pressures to take these drugs, but also knowing how to safely take them if we decide to do so, and knowing how to be prepared in case of an emergency. So of course, we'll be talking about the opioid and fentanyl epidemic, focusing on overdose prevention and community support specifically. We'll talk with those directly impacted by these drugs and highlight the life-saving role of friends in overdosing emergencies, because again, being prepared is crucial. Lastly, we'll talk with experts and community leaders to talk about the needed measures for preventing overdose, and this includes harm reduction, treatment, and recovery support services.
Before we get into this episode, we want to acknowledge that it's addressing a lot of serious topics, including substance abuse, opioid addiction, and fentanyl use. These are all deeply impactful and sensitive issues that affect people of all ages, classes, and backgrounds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, please prioritize your well-being and listen with care. With this episode, we hope to create greater empathy, understanding, and a sense of collective responsibility to support everyone affected. And resources and support information is also provided in the show notes of the episode. But with that being said, we'll be talking with Sheila Scott, founder of Schultz Foundation, which focuses on overdose response and naloxone training for parents and teens, as well as Dr. Terry Church, a professor at the University of Southern California, who focuses on patterns of addiction, disaster management, and education and training. Anyways, let's get into the episode.
GrownKid is made possible by the Schultz Family Foundation, dedicated to helping young people unlock their full potential and successfully navigate to fulfilling careers. GrownKid is made in partnership with Joy Coalition, where purpose-driven content means powerful storytelling. From 13 Reasons Why to Unprisoned, Joy Coalition projects are made to bridge generations and drive groundbreaking conversations.
I remember being in 4th grade and I was playing outside with my friends. And they were like, "Hey, Gael, like, when are you going home? When's your curfew? When do you need to go home?" I was like, "Not till like night. Why?" And they're like, "Just asking." And then they go out and whisper things to themselves, like, shh, 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 shh.
Like amongst themselves,
Amongst
leaving you
themselves.
out?
Yeah, and I was like, "What?" They were like, "Okay, well, you can't tell anyone." I was like, "I won't." They're like, okay, you can come with us."
You pass the test.
I won't. Okay, you're good. He's cool. And so I follow them, and I lived in these big apartments. And so we go from the park area of the apartments into the back corner of them where the dumpsters are and the parking lot. Mm-hmm. We go where the dumpsters like are, and they're covered by like 2 walls and like doors. We go in there, and I just see like a group of other like 4 kids of other 4th and 5th graders there. And then I go with my friends, little like 5'3" kids, squeaky little voice. And we go in there and they're like, okay. Next thing you know, they just start smoking weed. Like out of an apple, I think. I don't know what the fuck they were doing.
The classic apple.
Maybe a joint even. Maybe they had the classy. Who knows?
Oh, wow.
And I just remember like instantly holding my breath and going, oh.
You just faint.
I was like, I can't smell this. I'm gonna get cancer. Uh-huh. I was like, if I smell this, I'm gonna get cancer. And so I fully was just like, that was my first exposure to drugs. And that was my first like, oh wow, like why is everyone doing weed? And I remember I like left after like 20 minutes and I was like, oh my God.
You're so high.
No. No, I was like, what the fuck? Like, what was that? Like, who are they? Like my friends? Like, what have they become? And I was so scared. And after that, I feel like my world changed. I was just like, holy fuck, this is the real world.
Wow. That is such a young age.
It
That's
is.
like, what, 10 years old?
Yes.
That's so insane.
Uh-huh.
I don't think I was, I also don't have one specific memory of, oh, this is when I was introduced to drugs. I do remember though, like, I also lived in apartments, not the greatest area.
Right.
Of course.
Right.
And I would see people just like staying on the streets, looking a little bit distressed, I guess you can say, or just like
The stress.
You know, in my mind as a kid, I'm like, they look kind of out of it, or they just look like, you know, not doing the best. And I think that was my first intro of, oh, what are they feeling, or what are they experiencing that is making them act that way? Obviously, as you get older, you realize, oh, they're doing drugs.
So I also feel like this is such a unique experience, but why was everyone's cousin somehow a dealer? Like, everyone had a dealer cousin. And maybe this is like a poor people thing.
Oh, I think so,
but it was very
too.
close to us, where like I knew at least 2 or 3 people whose like cousins were like dealers, and they just had bags of weed at home the whole time.
I mean, I knew somebody that grew it. So he was probably giving it to your cousin.
Yeah, and then our cousins were.
Yes. Yeah, I remember, like, if we really wanted to do it, we could do it.
Yeah.
But never once did I just have that urge. And my parents too, they were like very anti like drugs or like weed. I think they were anti-alcohol too, but not as strongly as weed. They saw weed as like, oh, you're gonna become a drug addict if you do that, you know?
Addict.
Like, you're gonna become unrecognizable or something,
Yeah.
you know?
So, and then when it comes to drinking and stuff, like alcohol, because I feel like those were the 2, main ones.
Yeah.
I think my friends, the first recollection that I have of like friends drinking was in middle school as well.
Middle school.
So not elementary, at least. Thank the Lord.
Can you imagine?
A drunk
Jesus.
10-year-olds. Oh my God.
But that does.
They were definitely drinking probably out there,
Yeah.
but I really remember it during like middle school when like they would go to someone's house and they would all drink and.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's so
Yeah.
baffling, you know, like, especially when you have like little like siblings or just nephews and you think of them being so young and drinking.
And you also think like the
What?
people that were giving these middle schoolers alcohol, like a lot of them were adults.
Oh my God.
And that's when I'm like, in the moment, they're like, oh, they're so cool. They're so fucking cool. But now I'm like, how could, if I saw an adult giving like a middle schooler a drink and be like,
no.
go have fun, I'd be like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah. And the thing is, like, a middle schooler can never pass as like 21
No,
ever. I've never met a middle schooler that looks like even 18-year-old, you know? It's like, oh, that's...
No, they are little. And I think what's really weird, moving on from our younger years to where we are now, as we enter our 20s, I think drugs has changed so much. I mean, even just thinking back to the landscape of like substance use and drugs and parties and all that in like, I don't know, like 2016, 2018. And even in 2014, I feel like the biggest conversation point was cancer. It's like, oh, if you smoke, you're going to get cancer. If you drink, you're going to get cancer. Like, cancer was the killer.
Yeah.
I didn't hear about things you hear now of like, oh, you're going to overdose on fentanyl. Like the opioid crisis, the fent crisis. Like, people are dropping left and right because there's just like contamination and not good things in drugs as you would expect. And it feels like, honestly, over the past like 3 or 4 years, it's gotten so much more scary. And it's no longer like, oh, you know what, it's whatever. Like, it's part of everyone's coming of age, do drugs, whatever, fuck around, you're young. It's like, bitch, I could die at any moment now. And like, our friends could die at any moment now if they take the wrong thing, if they don't test their drugs, which is so scary because like, I mean, drugs have always been scary, but now it's like, oh, fuck.
Oh, yeah. And I think too, like, when we're younger, you know, substance abuse revolves around weed and alcohol. And now I think, especially being in college, now I'm hearing like talk of coke.
Are you doing coke this weekend? No, I think I'm just like, I don't know, maybe like keep it small, do some Molly, make some cat.
Yeah, I'm hearing, or at least from what I hear, it's more so now like coke and Molly. More talk about cat too, which is kind of really scary. Because at the end of the day, like, these are really big drugs that like we're taking, and we are so young. And I think too, like, obviously, like, the fentanyl crisis is so like prominent, but I think a lot of people, and I want to say like maybe especially young people, they don't realize just how serious it is because they're sort of removed from it in a way of like, oh, it hasn't happened to me. Or hasn't happened to like anybody that I know, so it's like, why would I?
It doesn't feel real. The thing about like like
real.
fentanyl and drugs is that it doesn't feel like you could die from it because it's just so unimaginable that like you take this and you're dead in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, like the concept of dying that easily just doesn't hit until it happens. And oh, it's so scary because I think also with like rave culture, you know, rave culture has just exploded. I mean, it's always been popular, but now you hear about it more and more. If like you go to a rave, you know, and if you know what a rave is, like music, techno, all that. You go to a music festival, you take Molly, you take acid, you do whatever, you take a pill, whatever. And of course you're supposed to test it, but there's definitely a lot of dumbasses that don't test it. No offense.
Offense, dare I say?
No offense. Actually, yeah, no, it's stupid as fuck to not test your drugs. And it's scary because I mean I've gone to raves, I've gone to like music festivals, and I've had my friends like, you know, take some Molly, take a pill, and so there was this one time where we were going to a music festival and they were all taking Molly, and they put it in like a water cup, and or actually no, there was this one time that I was with my friends and they were going to a music festival and they were all going to take Molly and it was in a pill, and I was like, oh, did you guys bring like fent strips to test it? And they were like, oh fuck, we bought them but we forgot them, and we were like 5 minutes away from home, and I was like, should we go back for them? And they were like, no, it's fine, like my friend takes this all the time, and like I get it from my friend and he's cool, so it's like it's fine. I was like, okay, well, maybe you shouldn't trust your friend, because it's always a friend of a friend that somehow ends up like.
Yes, that's always what I hear when talking about the safety of drugs.
Yeah.
It's always like, oh, well, no, like my friend has done this and they've done it a lot of times.
And it's like they know, you know where they get it from.
Yeah, and I'm like, there's always just that chance of like, you know, one could get mixed in there, a wrong one can mix in there. Like you never know, and it really is such a gamble, which is why it's so important that you test your drugs if you decide to take them.
Yeah. Like, no, and it's scary because I was like, bitch, it makes me anxious too. Like when you choose not to test your drugs, it's not just like you putting your own life at risk, but now I'm fucking nervous because I'm like, the whole time I'm thinking like, you could start overdosing right now, and like, what the fuck am I gonna do? Like, do I know what I'm gonna do? Do I have like Narcan? Like, what, you know? And I think when you don't test your drugs, it's so annoying because I feel like it ruins the moment and the vibe for everyone else, because now everyone's just paranoid because no one thinks it's gonna happen to them. Like, oh, there's gonna be fentanyl your drugs. No. But there's that nagging feeling of like, it very much could, and it's not fun. I mean, it's not fun for anyone.
Yeah, and I think in those instances too, where you're the one bringing up testing drugs, at least from what I've experienced, it's like, how much do I push to do this? Because I don't want to be
loser.
I don't loser. No, I don't. Not even that. I just don't want to like kill the vibe, or like be like naggy, or be mom, like so, be mom, or like kill the vibe of like, oh, let's just be carefree and stuff. Which, like, yes, let's be carefree and young, but let's also be safe, you know? And so I still don't really know, like, when do I just like let it go and when do I keep pushing for it? Because like, obviously if you think of it in terms of this is life or death, then obviously you're gonna push for it until they do it. But when you're in the moment, it just feels like, oh, this is maybe now a little bit awkward, and like there's a little bit tension, you know?
Yeah. No, that's so true. How much should you push for your friends to test the drugs for fent? To what extent? To what extent? Because it's like, are you like, no, I'm not letting you take it unless you do it? Because at some point it's like, it's their life. They have their choice. It is their choice. But also, if you're with friends that are so inconsiderate, they don't understand how the fact that you're coming together as a group, but if one person's taking drugs without testing them, it puts that social anxiety and that anxiety on everyone else, because now everyone has that, like, they can't relax. Now there's that nagging feeling of, you could die at any moment now.
Yeah, there is that feeling too of like, you have to be the one to take care of people, like how you said.
Yes.
And I've definitely like experienced that where it feels like, oh, now I can't be 100% loose, whether like drugs are in the picture or not, you know? Like now I just need to be extra aware, extra attentive, and make sure that you're doing okay. And like a lot of the times I think the people that are the ones taking drugs, they're always like, oh, like don't be that way. Like I'm gonna be totally fine.
Don't worry about me.
Don't worry about me.
It's like, bitch, it's not that easy.
So it's like, I'm worried about your livelihood here. Which again makes me sometimes question myself. I'm like, oh, damn, am I being like just too like up the ass? You know, like, am I being too, you know, like, can I just let this go?
Right.
So right. I don't really know.
Honestly, it's just one of those things that's like, just talk to your friends about it. Make sure you have considerate friends. It's like, if you're doing drugs, be considerate of the people around you and know that they are your friends and they're probably going to be the ones to take care of you if something goes wrong. So at least be considerate enough to be like, okay, I tested this. I feel good. It's okay. Here's some Narcan. I know what to do. You know what to do, whatever. And this is also the point to get into of something we want to talk about in this episode is like just overdose prevention and like what are the ways to be safe while taking drugs and going to festivals and doing all this shit. And I also don't want to make it seem like just because you tested your drug, it's all safe and you're good. Like, no, there are very real possibilities. Like, for example, there was this one time where I was at a music festival. My friend took Molly. He tested the drug. He, you know, didn't have fent in it. But then after a couple hours, the festival's ending. He's like, oh my God, my chest hurts. Like, my chest hurts. Like, it feels like I can't breathe. I'm like, oh, maybe it's just like, maybe you lost your voice, whatever. A couple hours pass. It's like 4 a.m. We're about to go to bed, but then he wakes me up like 10 minutes later and he's like, hey, like, can we go to the ER? I'm like, oh, shit. What's going on? He's like, my breaths are getting really short. It feels like I can't breathe. And I'm scared that it's just going to completely like close up or something. Like, I don't know. Is my throat closing? Who the fuck knows? I was like, okay, yeah, like, let's take you to the ER. And so we went, drove him to the ER and they did a bunch of tests. And they found out, one, he was like extremely dehydrated, which is like another point. Hydrate and don't dehydrate yourself. But two, thankfully there was no fent in the fucking Molly, but there was meth. And the meth, the doctor said, like, yeah, if there was a little bit more, you definitely could have been like at a very high risk of a heart attack because his levels, there's this like level of something he checks for where if that thing is too high in your body, you're basically at risk of a heart attack, was like creeping up and it was on the higher end of the normal. So he was still safe, but they were like, yeah, the reason why your chest was hurting was because your heart was very strained, and if there was any more meth in that, like, you definitely could have had one. And the man was like 20, so it's like a 20-year-old getting a heart attack, like, what the fuck? So it's things like that that are very scary because you just never know what could go wrong. And even if you're testing your drugs and there's no fent, like, there is still the possibility that there could be so many other things in it. But before we like continue talking about it, I do want to talk with some of the experts that can give us the big overview, the big PSA of what is the responsible way to do drugs, what are things to keep in mind, how do you do it safely, how do you do it responsibly if you are going to do it. So let's go learn a little bit from them before we start talking about everything else. Interested in a career in mental health? Check out the Youth Mental Health Corps, a new program created by the Schultz Family Foundation, Pinterest, and AmeriCorps, where anyone with a high school degree can gain experience, skills, and a credential during a year of paid service in the mental health field. You can learn more at youthmentalhealthcorps.org or by checking out the link in the description.
Now we want to talk with Sheila Scott, founder of the Luke Love Foundation, an organization dedicated to overdose response training for parents and teens. Sheila founded this organization after the tragic loss of her son, Luke, who was just 21 years old when he passed away from an accidental overdose. Her firsthand experience has fueled her mission to educate and empower others, offering a powerful perspective on the importance of awareness, prevention, and community support in combating the opioid crisis.
So, Sheila, first of all, we would love if you could just tell us your personal story and why this issue of substance use is so important to you.
I got dragged into this in 2016 when my son Luke died of an overdose. And it plunged me into the most physical, unimaginable grief. I mean, I was in a walking coma for about 3 years. I wrote and journaled and then published. So then I became known for telling the truth about what this really feels like. Then, of course, I was looking for a way to change that. Firstly, starting with helping women who have experienced traumatic bereavement, because therapists are not really geared up for this. They're geared up to resource you out of this. And there's no resourcing you out of a dead child, especially someone that died traumatically and unnecessarily. And then I found the naloxone distribution project, which is the California Department of Health's free naloxone distribution. And I thought, well, there's no cure for what I have, Gail. So if I could prevent this from happening to anybody else, then maybe that would be my shot. So I learned to reverse overdose and became part of the naloxone distribution project. And now we distribute thousands and train thousands of people every year how to reverse an overdose in the hope that it might rescue another woman from what I endure.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience and being so open about it. I think it's so inspiring that you've used the tragedy that you experienced as now the driving force in your mission. And I really think your courage and the work that you're doing to help others is truly so inspiring. And we're so grateful for the impact that you're making through the Lukla Foundation. We think it's really, truly incredible work. And I think also, too, the scary part about overdosing is how unexpected it can happen. And it leaves us to deal with that anxiety of, oh my God, if something were to happen, how do I deal with that? Am I trained to deal with that? And then there's also the part of having to think about what comes afterwards, like who do you call? Who are their parents? What if you don't have their number? And I think that there's so much in that process. And that's why so many young people take that approach of, I'd rather not think about it because it feels easier to acknowledge than the possibility of somebody overdosing actually becoming a reality.
Firstly, the whole point of drug taking is a slip away from the reality. I mean, nobody goes into using drugs thinking, when I grow up, I'd like to be a fentanyl addict. That isn't how this works. But to your point, you as a bystander, you're my favorite. You're my favorite kind of person in all of this, because my job is to give you naloxone and give you the power of naloxone and the courage to use it. And you don't need to be involved in what's next, because really you should call 911 and an ambulance should take over from, you're like the first point of the rescue. So to go back to how overdose works, with heroin, it's a lot slower. With fentanyl, it's very, very quickly. It can be 3 minutes. So any kind of hesitation could cost a life. An ambulance in the Los Angeles area takes about 11 minutes and brain damage starts at 4. Now, this is a can be, because someone might be more tolerant. What you could take and what I could take could be very different. So I really want people not to hesitate. And, it is a nasal spray that you should really think of more as a brain spray that you get to through the nose. And all it does is uncap the opioid and allow breathing to resume. And then someone could have called 911 in that time, and then they take over from you. And if you want to know how my teen army feel about it, occasionally I get this text saying, hey, she just saved a life. And I throw myself on the phone and, hi, how was it? Are you all right? And I've spoken to all my fancy therapists, like, oh my goodness, I'm traumatizing all these brilliant teens. And they're literally like, I came, I saw, I narcaned, I did what you want, I went to lunch.
Yeah, that's such an interesting perspective. I think I rarely hear about what it feels like to be the one to have to give Narcan to someone. And maybe actually hearing that would make me feel more confident or reassured of my role in that if I ever were to be in that situation. So what have you seen when it comes to the people that were on the other side of an overdose?
To my therapist, and they were like, no, Sheila, trauma is what happens when you're powerless. This gives you the power. I gave them the power, which was so moving and so touching. I think I cried for about 4 hours straight after that. So then there's other people that we've bullied into literally carrying naloxone, people that we know. And then they're like, oh, they were just walking, they just parked their car and someone shouted, has anyone got any naloxone? Or Narcan is the brand name, naloxone is the medicine. And they got it out of their glove compartment and then handed it and saved the life. Actually, they did it. And so this is an empowerment. But as you know, everything that you buy on the market is pretty much got some fentanyl in it. So therefore it will be an opioid. And so, you can't help them, just get the shit up their nose and carry on dancing.
I love that. And I'm also curious because I think part of the reason sometimes hearing about all of this and hoping it's never us to have to administer this is because we're kind of scared of, well, if one of my friends overdoses and then what if the cops show up and then I'm also on some sort of drug or something? What does that mean in terms of like, can I get in trouble or?
So it's huge to teach the people that if we're all getting down and we've got drugs all over the place and I start to overdose and you call for help. And normally when you call 911, speak to what you see. Person is unresponsive. They're not responding to the sternal rub. They're not breathing. All sorts of ways we teach you how to identify it. And the cops show up by accident. They can't do us. They cannot do it. I mean, if we've got 40 kilos out the back, we're in trouble. And the reason why they've had to make those laws is pretty much everyone I know personally, and probably myself, our children are dead because the people were scared to call for help. So I want you to realize, and if you go to my website, lootlove.org, I've got a thing called the law, and you can screenshot the law and you can say, with respect, officer, it's an extension of the Samaritan law to cover this. If the person still dies, even though you did do the naloxone, there's no liability. You really are protected. And that's because so many people are dead because people got scared. And with the push for drug-induced homicide coming back to life again, which I oppose greatly, people might get more nervous. So if you are the person that gave them a drug, leave if you're scared.
Yeah, you see, this episode, I think part of the messaging is very much just around that. And like, how do you empower and show that like this reversal, it doesn't have to be such a scary thing, I'm worried about my own safety. It's no, really the concern is help your friend and hope that like there's not another unnecessary life that gets taken by this crisis. I mean, the fent crisis has gotten so scary.
And also, if I didn't try and save the person, I would feel terrible if they died. I mean, it's a lose-lose, it's scary all the way around. So it's lovely that we've given the power. And if you don't want to do it, Gail, there'll be someone else in the room who might want to take your naloxone out of your pocket and they'll do it for you if you're feeling scared in the moment. But it's literally, I came, I saw, I Narcan. That's pretty much what my text messages say.
And one more thing that I wanted to ask about too is you said that there's something called nitazines.
Yes. So nitazines are like the new drug on the block, if you like. Nitazene is another opioid, but it's not a fentanyl analog. So when the justice system goes strongly after fentanyl and creates special laws around fentanyl, what the cartels will always do, they'll always be one step ahead. They found nitazenes, which is a group of drugs, isos, tonies. It'll always have that, that isos, tonies, there's a full range of them. Some of them can be 30 times stronger than fentanyl, and some of them can be weaker. And they are there to avoid the specialist fentanyl laws that have been created. So they don't qualify for that. The problem is we don't have testing strips for them, and the medical examiner's office are not routinely testing to see if that's the cause of death.
Oh, wow. So there's even more danger. Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. That's not reassuring, especially since you can't really test for it, or it's not what most people are testing for. So
yeah, and testing isn't a slam dunk. So if you do test your drugs, and your dealer might say they're testing their drugs, but that they were going to be doing that properly, it means they would take all of the baggies, open them all up, soak them all in exactly the right amount of water, then test the whole of the water, then rehydrate them, and then rebag them. I don't think that they're doing that. I think they're doing a random spot check, and we do know that you could do that with your supply, and some would be negative and some would be positive. Don't trust anyone else to do it for you. But yeah, it's scary, and it's not going to get easier.
And that's the other thing about testing is something I hear a lot of friends say is, well, I go to a music festival and they offer testing sites and there's, free Narcan and there's free test strips everywhere. But it almost feels like you're supposed to be very secretive about the testing. Is that true? Can you get punished? Can you get in trouble for being seen using a test, even if there's no clear indication of what you're testing?
Some states don't even allow testing strips. They consider it paraphernalia. California allow you to carry it. And some people get into trouble for carrying naloxone, and you just say, I'm part of a harm reduction battalion. Say you're part of the Luke Love naloxone battalion. Say where harm reduction is. And we're doing their job for them. Yes, you're right. It's very mixed. And I think it depends very much on the circumstances. I mean, there are organizations that go in and do your testing for you. You don't have to hide this. And if you get into trouble, I imagine nothing's much going to come out of it. And if anybody wants to get tested, our testing is free. Our kits are free. They come very lively. They're designed so you can find them in your handbag or in your rucksack. We have stickers like this is the shit set in the fan, and it's all available in Spanish too. And look, you can't lose that in your handbag. So we do testing. And we have test strips now from the state of California, the most easy to use I've ever seen. We'll come to your house. We'll come to your radio station. If you stand behind me in a coffee shop, you'll get trained.
Yeah, I think you can never really overestimate or you can never really understate the importance of testing your drugs. And it's just scary because sometimes you really are like, oh my God, am I going to get in trouble for even having these tests? So it's nice to know like you probably won't get punished. So at least you can help your friends and relax in that sense.
Yeah, I think that's the part that really stuck with me is the fear behind like, oh my God, what if like a cop shows up and then I'm also like on something or I get in trouble for helping. But yeah, it was nice getting that reassurance that administering Narcan or helping isn't something that has to, I think she said something along the lines of like, it's not something that has to be a huge deal in your life. It's something that you just do. And I think that gave me a lot of comfort.
Anyways, we just want to thank Sheila again for coming on and sharing a deeply personal story with us and opening up about her loss and the incredible work that she's doing through the Lukula Foundation to prevent anyone else from experiencing something similar. Let's get back to the episode. Next, we're going to talk with Dr. Terry Church, a professor at the University of Southern California who focuses on patterns of addiction, disaster management, and education and training. He is the co-leader of the Los Angeles Training Consortium, which is responsible for enhancing addiction-related education from the community level throughout the highest levels of higher education to enhance the community's ability to serve and treat individuals. So here's his interview.
So, how has the rise of fentanyl shifted the way we understand and are addressing drug addiction? And more than anything, like how we're talking about it? And is there anything that we're not paying as much attention to as we should be?
So keep in mind that fentanyl is 100 times stronger than morphine, 50 times stronger than heroin. So a small amount will get you to the same level as either heroin or morphine. And the problem with it is it's easy to make if you know a little bit about chemistry. And if you don't, you can also import it rather easily in bulk from countries outside of the US. There's all kinds of mail order services that are not being regulated as they should be. And unfortunately, because of this, we see a rise in adulterated products. And that's just a fancy way of saying changed or altered. So when you adulterate something, especially in the black market, it's easy to do it with things that are already illegal. So for example, MDMA. Recently, there was some statistics that were put out by the DEA. In all of the MDMA pills that they had confiscated at the border being claimed to be ecstasy or MDMA, only 1% of all that they had confiscated contained any MDMA. The rest were mostly fentanyl. So it's being brought in, it's being misused, it's being added to things to help make a product stretch, for lack of a better term. It's being cut into a lot of the products that people are being given at different venues, such as Coachella, for example, or clubs themselves. And it's really problematic because it's not easy to detect. And it's not usually until someone starts to overdose that we realize, oh, this is an opioid overdose. You can use test strips. You can use small kits that you get from places like DanceSafe, but unfortunately, they're not available everywhere. If we were in Europe, it would be totally different. They've had much longer culture with testing drugs at venues, and it's socially acceptable. Here, it's still seen as, well, if we test it, it's part of harm reduction, and harm reduction still is equated by a lot of people as facilitating drug use rather than helping to end it or reduce the actual harm.
That seems like a shocking statistic that out of all of the MDMA pills they collected, only 1% actually contained it. So I'm curious, what are these pills made up of then?
It's usually a mix of substances, but fentanyl lately has become the top culprit that we're seeing. Just because it's gram for gram, it's going to give you an effect, which, if you are If you're an illegal drug dealer, you want there to at least be an effect so people feel like they're getting something. And it's just easy to substitute it in.
If it's unrealistic to expect the complete abandonment of drug use and the only solution being harm reduction to keep individuals and communities safe, what are those effective approaches and what can we do to implement them in our social circles, in our communities, ourselves, to minimize the risk of an overdose and substance abuse, as a whole?
Great question. So I think that the very first and easiest step that anyone could do, no matter what community they're in, no matter what their education level is just have open conversations. Open conversations will help because it's the stigma that surrounds a lot of these drug using activities that people, they're not talking about it, they don't feel comfortable talking about it, and because of that, they're not getting the information that they need. So just having an open and frank conversation is kind of the first step that most people can participate in. From there, you could see things like Suboxone or naloxone. So the sprays that you see people use on TV probably. Um, it's very easy to become trained in those. And, at USC where I work, we actually have vending machines throughout campus where students can go and use their ID card and get this relieving drug that will help end an overdose. And that was brought to us by a couple of different organizations on campus who realized that we don't have access to these things and we need to. Um, People in the School of Pharmacy where I'm housed, they go out to fraternities and sororities and they provide naloxone training and actually hand out naloxone to people to have so that it's available. That's the next step. You can also get test strips available. In Los Angeles, you can find them in quite a few places. I was just at Hamburger Mary's and they had them right at the front counter. As you were checking out, you could take a little test strip and go test whatever products you have to see if it has an opioid in it. All of these things are there to not halt people from doing drugs because we learned in the 90s that if you do that, just say no. No one's actually going to take you seriously. But if you can help people be smarter and be more educated about what they're doing, that also helps. And then at the far end of the spectrum, you have safe injection sites, which are very controversial. There are only a few currently available in the state of California, mostly focused in Northern California and San Francisco, but they're places where people can go. There's medical professionals who are there and they can inject their drugs. They're given clean needles. They're giving them education on how to reduce their intake or even get off of the substances. And it's also a place where if the product had been adulterated with fentanyl, that they can get medical care immediately rather than dying on the street.
I do want to also ask about safe drug practices, specifically when trying to avoid any fentanyl intake. And so I have a couple questions about this one. Something, how reliable are test strips? I mean, can they detect all amounts of fentanyl? Are they easy to mess up? And so I would love to know more about the process of actually testing your drugs.
Sure. So test strips are great. They're not infallible. But what they do is they tell you of the presence of an opioid. They can't determine what opioid it is, but it will tell you that there is an opioid present. And usually it will be fentanyl. So that's a good marker. Now, it's not going to tell you how much of the opioid is in the product. It's not going to give you like this contains 75% opioid. It's not that sophisticated, but what it does do is it gives you an indication that there is an opioid present, and that should be enough of a warning sign for people to say, all right, let me just not do this. In order to be able to determine like what the full composition is, you'd have to have a lab be able to determine that. So this puts the power of the lab in your hand by giving you a way to determine if there are opioids present. And just as a rule of thumb, if I saw that it had an opioid present, I would not be inclined to take it. Now, there are people out there who, especially in the 20s and early 30s, who think that they are Superman, they don't worry about their mortality. But really, when it comes to opioids, you can't take that bet. You can't take that action. You really have to be cognizant about it, especially as these things get more and more potent. So I would say it's a good indicator that there is something there, and that should be enough of a warning for you to say, all right, let me pass on that.
And that's the other thing that I hear people getting really confident. I've heard this I've heard many stories about this of friends being like, hey, maybe we don't need to test it or it's fine. Or my friends are always get it from the same person and they've taken it multiple times and it's okay. Or let's just test one pill. And since we got the rest of the pills from the same dealer, then we don't need to test all of them. So what is the problem with thinking that way?
So there's a thing in pharmacy, it's called batch to batch variation. When you are working with an FDA facility that has been tested by the FDA and given the go ahead to produce medicine, you know that each batch is going to be consistent. Each time they press a pill, it's going to have the same amount of drug in it. And you can test 10, 20, 30, 40 different pills from different lots, as they're called, so different production cycles, and they will all have the same basic, within a variance of maybe 1 to 2 milligrams of what the product should be. When you do batch to batch verification in street drugs, not the same thing. 9 times out of 10, you could have one pill that is 90% fentanyl and another one that is 1% from the same dealer, from the same batch that was made, just the way that it had been constructed and put into the pill form. So it's a very crude way of doing it. Keep in mind, they don't have to keep up with regulations. They can make it however they want. It doesn't have to be in a sanitary lab or have the same rigor. And that is what a lot of drug dealers deal with, the fact that they have to assume that the product that they're getting is what it is being sold to them as, and then they're going to turn around and sell it to you under the same guise. And the problem is that it's just that relies too much on humans being good to one another. And unfortunately, we're not always the best to one another. And I think that when you add in things like money, people tend to overlook ethics and overlook the idea that you have human lives at stake.
I'm so glad that we got to talk to experts about it because I think it gave me a lot of information that to this day I don't fully know about drugs or the risk involved and how to properly take them. Because I think as I got older, especially, honestly, even now, I think especially as I got older, specifically this year, and visiting my hometown again and where I grew up, I see everything a lot more clearly and I see the implications of my surroundings so much more in a way that I feel more, it's not much, I see everything around me much more clearly in the sense that I'm no longer as curious about what these people are going through, but now much more empathetic. And it does make me really sad when I when I go back to my hometown and I see that just on the streets, a lot more people are suffering and they desperately need help, but my community can't do anything to help them because they're also struggling as well, and shit, they might be 1 degree away from that. So I think now I'm just a lot more aware of what I'm seeing when I go home, and not even just when I'm home. I think even living in South Central LA, you see a lot of people experiencing this. And it always makes me so upset when I hear people talk about others that are dealing with substance abuse in a degrading way and in a way of just dehumanizing this person. Because I think a lot of the times when people hear that somebody else is taking drugs or hard drugs or they're addicted to it, they're immediately stripped of their humanity, which makes me so sad because it's they're literally just a person and addiction is a disease. And so I think I've had a lot more exposure to it now in a way that I can understand and digest it,
Yeah, and not only that, but just understanding why people turn to substances and how closely related it is to just mental illness and mental health. And I understand what you're saying because I think the area that I grew up around, there was a strip mall, a laundromat where there's a small parking lot and little stores nearby, your typical corner stores. And as a kid, I've grown up around that my entire life, and now I'm older that I could see whoa, there's always people drinking here. There's always people passed out on the sidewalk at 7 p.m., at 11 p.m. There's people drinking at 9 a.m. At all hours of the day, there's someone or a group of people drinking or smoking or whatnot. And I don't think I thought too much about it when I was younger. It was just something that was so normal to me. But now I have that empathy of, you know, like this feels like a failure of education, a failure of systems, a failure of government to care for these people, because a lot of times it's like they're unemployed, or they can't find a job, or they've lost their family members, or they have no mental health resources, so they've turned to substance abuse to cope with that, because there is no other way out for these people in many cases. And yeah, I mean, I agree that point of how everyone seems to see them as so just not human anymore. And like, especially now when I'm in New York, and you see so much more of that when you're on the metro. And something that has really spoken to me and just I find so inspiring is when I see someone struggling on the metro, and everyone kind of, you know, reasonably so, and probably for their own safety, they move to another car on the subway, on the metro, they move to another car, or they just leave and give them distance and stay away from the people, whoever's like kind of having a moment. But I've had a lot of experiences where I see like a person that will check up on them and ask them like, hey, like, are you okay? Like, do you need help? Do you need water? Do you need something? Like, what's wrong? And there was this one specific moment when we were like on the subway, and there was this man sitting on the end of the subway car, just kind of like, I don't know, he was just really seemed like he was in despair, like kind of tripping out, not happy, really just like it sounded bad. And it was so crazy because even in that moment, I was kind of scared. I was like, oh my God, like, are you like, this could blow up, like the man could blow up on him and be like, no, like, get the fuck away from me, whatever. Who knows what was going to happen, and you're in this like enclosed cart, so it could get a little scary. But the man was just like, oh, you're the, like, thank you so much for helping me and like seeing me, like, I don't know. He just started talking to him, and they just kind of sat down, and he offered him some water, and the man started to calm down and like, you know, just relax a little bit. And I got off soon after. But then after that experience, I was like, wow, like how it takes so much courage, first of all, to be able to approach someone that's clearly in pain and struggling that openly, but so much empathy, and it takes so much humanity to continue to see these people that, like, yes, even though it's scary and intimidating and possibly dangerous, but at the end of the day, they are still like a person. And I think especially with us, now that we're entering our 20s and entering our college years, is there is so much change that's starting to happen. There's people that are starting careers, people that are feeling lost in life. And the way that people deal with that stress and that change oftentimes is like turning to drugs. Hearing all these stories is so interesting to me, because also like another point is we don't realize how close even just like the fent and the opioid crisis is to us and like parents also. Like, you've seen the news of like these powerful people even that are like multimillionaires, their kids take a wrong drug at the party and they end up overdosing on like fent. It could happen so easily and to anyone. It doesn't really matter if you're like poor or rich or whatever. And that's what's scary to think about. Is like, this is so close to us. Like, thankfully, we've never experienced someone that has had like a bad experience with drugs like that. But it makes me scared because I'm like, am I even prepared for it? You know, like,
Prepared for what?
an overdose? Like, do I know? Well, actually, we did take a training.
We did.
We
yeah.
did. When we went to Coachella, which sounds insane to say, but when we went to Coachella, I really wanted to take an overdose prevention thing. Actually, End Overdose was there. They always, End Overdose is the Oregon. They always have pop-ups at different music festivals where a lot of drug use obviously takes place, where they train people and then give them free Narcan. And I really wanted to do it because I never had gotten trained to do that before. And one of my friends was very much like, oh yeah, I did the training and it was really helpful. They taught me everything, and I like definitely think you should do it. And so we went and we did it, and it was really, really helpful because I feel like now I at least have an idea of what to do, what to look out for if I'm like at a festival or at a party and someone starts showing these signs of overdosing.
Yeah, I mean, I remember going to, I still have the like Narcan little bottles in my room just in case. And like, if I happen to go anywhere where I know people will be taking drugs, and like, I'll just like take it with me. But I feel like, speaking of just like Coachella in general, it kind of reminds me, I also think that drugs are just so casually talked about in like music as well. Like, I keep on thinking like, you know, A$AP Rocky's song like LSD, like, I just feel like talk of Molly, acid, shrooms, coke, it's so like glamorized in a way that, oh, like if you really want to experience like a true party feeling or whatever the fuck, you know, it's like you want to take these drugs, or like it's always talked about in a very highly regarded way, in a way of like, this is only a good experience, you know, which obviously is like, I think sometimes when I hear music about it and like, you know, it's good experiences, I'm hearing A$AP Rocky like talking about how it's like the greatest feeling in his life, and I'm like, well, I want to be like A$AP Rocky.
Yeah.
No, but it's like, wow, now I'm curious about it, you know? It's like, oh, because it's being talked about by somebody that I like really like and admire, now I'm a little bit curious, you know? And I feel like that goes for a lot of just like artists and songs in general, that like it promotes it in a very positive way, to say the least. And I wish like with that same promotion would be the safety of it, you know? 'Cause it's like, it can be irresponsible, to say the least. And now I feel like a fucking loser, dude. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, I can't like say this without sounding like,
Well, we have to
you
make
know?
being responsible cool again. Like, that's what
like,
we fucking need, guys.
yeah, like I'm sorry, like I want to
No,
live
the
and I
cool-
want my friends to
Yes,
live, you
and that's so
know?
fair. The cool kids carry Narcan.
Yeah,
The fuck? Like, I don't give a fuck.
It's in my bag. I'm sorry.
Well, anyways, that is, it's a hard conversation. It's a tough conversation. I'm glad we got some guidance, though, on how to bring these issues up and not feel like I'm being annoying.
Yeah, and I'm glad we got different perspectives on it, too, from parents as well, because I think that those stories aren't told a lot of the times, but they are very, very real and a lot more common than we think. So.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, I think substance abuse affects everyone. I mean, not just us or the person doing the drug, but your friends, your family, your peers, everyone. It's so scary. Stay safe, guys, please. Like, stay safe. It's like, sure, I'm not going to say be abstinent, because it's like if you're going to a music festival, you're old, you're in your 20s, yeah, sure, go live it up. It's like you have one life, but be safe about it. Be responsible. That is the best we can do. The cool kids carry Narcan.
Yes.
The cool kids get trained on overdose prevention. Duh. But that's
Caring
it.
about your life is so cool.
No,
it
yeah,
really
it
is,
really
you guys.
fucking,
Like,
it's lit.
it's okay
It's
to
so
be
lit.
chalant about it.
Stop with the nonchalantness. It's talking about life or death, bro. Like, bro, come on. Anyways, that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully this gave you a new perspective, helped you out, made you feel a little less alone. If you also aren't like, if you're also scared when your friends aren't testing drugs, it's like totally fine. But follow us on Instagram at GrownKid, because we're going to be posting a lot of really helpful information on overdosing and basically just training. We'll do a training together.
Yeah, we will. We'll go to another rave and we'll go to a testing site and see what's up there. Yeah.
GK at the testing site.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And not only that, we post new episodes every Thursday, so make sure you follow us so that you're notified. And let's just have a little discussion about this, you know? I feel like with every episode, we just enjoy hearing what you guys have to say.
Yes.
Because, again, it's only us two, so.
We'll leave a Q&A and a poll if you're listening on Spotify that you can interact with. But you could also leave us a message on Instagram, of course, like I said, at GrownKid. We'll have more resources in the show notes down below. And so if you're interested in learning a little bit more about the topic of today, just check that out. But regardless, good luck out there, be safe, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye.